So, welcome to this episode of the Non-Fungible Podcast. This is Bendy, aka Slam, as you know me from Twitter and Telegram. Today we have Phil with us from Obius, and Phil and I have been talking in the background for a while now. We met at a Constellation event, we've kept in touch ever since, and have been chatting here and there on all things Web2 and Web3, and that got us the idea to essentially record this podcast session, because I think there's a lot of overlap and a lot of things we have in common between Alkimi and Obius. And so today's theme is about Web2 and or Web3. What are the synergies? Where are we headed for this space? So welcome, Phil.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here. So maybe we start with, most people are familiar with Alkimi and Obius, I assume, but maybe for those that are new to this series, or maybe just discovering all things Constellation and Hypergraph and Web3, maybe we do a quick intro to yourself, and I can quickly cover Alkimi.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Phil. I'm the CEO of Obius, and with Obius we're trying to achieve a DLT-based ERP software, where ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. So basically, every company has transactions in their company, every company has to produce documents, and we, with Obius, cover these documents and, let's say, keep track of the whole workflow of the company. And yeah, in general, we are building on the Hypergraph, Constellation Hypergraph, with zero fees. And so it's a full, let's say, Web3 project, but of course, coming from the Web2 space, and the use case is also established in the Web2 already. And I think so is Alkimi.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's what got us talking, because when you think of Alkimi, as most people on here will know, we're building the first decentralized advertising exchange. That in itself is an industry that exists. It's alive and well. It's a $600 billion a year industry that we're trying to break into. Obviously, there are some issues with the current tech that we might get into today. And so, as you said, much like ERP is very much something that exists, it's a question of how we might be able to use Web3 technology, not to rip out and replace everything there is, but more improve on the existing Web2 solutions. What would you say is, what got you this idea on, how did you start Obius, and how did you get this idea on, okay, I understand Web3 enough to see what the use case could be and how this could improve an existing solution like ERP software?
Yeah, so I'm a learned software developer, and back in the days I worked as an SAP consultant, ERP consultant, and yeah, I saw many problems with this existing market of ERP software. For example, I consulted a company, and they are selling merchandising, and back in the days it was Black Friday, and you can imagine that on Black Friday there's a huge spike in the demand of these t-shirts, for example, and yeah, the server was not capable of, let's say, proceeding all the transactions that happened there on this day, and so the server broke down and transactions in the queue were lost. And of course, this was a huge money loss. We told the community, hey, please reorder, but you can imagine only a small percentage did this. And yeah, then I thought about, okay, it's a bit tricky to have this all at your local server, or maybe at a cloud server, which is basically the computer of somebody else. And yeah, then I thought about, okay, with cryptocurrency, we could combine, let's say, the Web2 resources that you have in your company. So for example, every company, and it does not matter if you are Web2 or Web3, has, for example, human resources, or every company has invoices they have to write. This is nothing new. Right. But on the same side, when you are a Web3 company, you also have these digital assets, these digital resources in general. So maybe you have an own native token for your ecosystem, you have an NFT collection, maybe you are also offering some kind of service like Alkimi do. And yeah, this is really tricky, because in the current ERP market and system, you as a Web3 company cannot combine the traditional resource that you have to keep track of and the Web3 resources, the digital resources in one software. And so basically we are, let's say, improving the Web2 ERP and also adding additional modules like for Web3 in this regard. And I think, this is the best symbiosis, and especially for startups and Web3 companies, which we are targeting.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think it's a fantastic example of a use case where you take a Web2 solution that already works, but has its issues and flaws, and try to bring that into Web3, so to say. What would you say? So basically, you saw things you could improve using Web3 technology on a Web2 solution. Are there things that now that you're in the weeds, so to speak, you're deep in the project, building it out and so on, what are the things that you see on the Web3 side that Web2 still does better?
So maybe it would be cool if we first clarify what is Web2 and Web3, maybe for you, maybe from my understanding, because sometimes people are not, or they are familiar with the term, but sometimes they don't really get what this means. So from my perspective, when we start with Web 1, it was basically read-only web pages online. So something like Wikipedia, for example, where you as a consumer just read the information that you get. And when we got to Web 2, it was the shift from like being a consumer and like only reading things and consume. But then with Web 2, we came to the, let's say, account part. And everybody had an account. For example, you're creating your Google account at Google and your Facebook account at Facebook. And this account is basically tied to one web page, for example, maybe to multiple when you are using multiple products from the same company. And when we got the shift to Web 3, it's basically an identity and an account that travels with you around the different pages. So it's basically your bank account at the same time as your identity. And for example, if you are having a MetaMask wallet or Stargazer wallet, you have this, let's say, account at the page of Uniswap, for example, but you can also go to SushiSwap and have the same account and the same identity, basically. And this is my understanding from like an identity that is some kind of tied to you, but also, let's say, travels around with you. Is this also your understanding?
Yes, and I think you touch on an important point when you talk about identity, and with identity comes data, right? There's a lot of data that's floating around that we all put online. Sometimes voluntarily, sometimes we didn't really mean to, or we didn't realize where that data would go once we had shared it. And I think that's one of the big things that comes with Web3 is it gives us as users back a lot of the control about our data. And I think that's at the same time, that's a good thing, but it also means a lot of responsibility and a lot of things that we need to probably learn again, so to speak, because there's this responsibility that we own our own data. We are responsible for where it goes and what we do with it. And I think that's something that Web2 had managed to make very easy. It was very easy to be lured into, well, just give up your data, we'll deal with it. You create an account, just tell us who you are. We'll save the data for you. You don't have to worry about it. If you forget your password, don't worry, just hit a button and reset it. It's all stored in our database, so you can get access every time you want to and so on. So I think that was one of the things that still is one of the things that Web2 does a lot better. It's the interaction with it is a lot more seamless and more integrated into our daily life than a lot of the Web3 applications that we start to see. You mentioned MetaMask. That's a good example. It's fairly easy to set up an account, but if you then want to go and use it somewhere, if you actually, now I have an account, what do I do with it? How do I actually purchase any cryptocurrency, or how do I use this as a login for a site and so on? It very quickly becomes very technical. And I've seen this, I've coached quite a few people on learning what blockchain is, what cryptocurrencies are, how to get started and so on. And there is a big barrier not to entry, because it's fairly easy to get started and set things up and then just be part of that ecosystem. But then to actually keep going by yourself, that's where I see a lot of people basically just give up, because they just feel it's a lot easier just to use an existing account, because they just make it easy. And I think that's one of the big challenges for Web3 is to make that a lot more accessible and the interactions with it a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also one thing that comes to my mind. For example, when it comes to creating new wallets, like you mentioned. So it's really easy, to be honest, to create a new wallet. And it's not as easy, from my experiences, to just open another bank account, for example. And you can easily create one wallet a day for just a new use case, some kind of new bank account to just manage different expenses, for example. But on the same hand, it's not as easy as that to, for example, open new wallets or new bank accounts at other banks, for example. So you don't have typical 10 bank accounts in real life.
Yeah.
And this is a great thing because I think the, let's say, education on this side is also, it lacks of education. And this is not only because we have less people that are educating people, but also because it's, like you mentioned, very technical in the end. And sometimes people are not willing to put in the effort to learn all about this. So what is a ledger or some kind of, what is the, let's say, underlying blockchain that keeps track of all the transaction? And sometimes when I also coached some people on how to get into cryptocurrency as well, and then they worked with cryptocurrency like half a year. And when I then tell them that everything they do is basically, let's say, transparent in some way that you can just track every transaction that the wallet did, they are very shocked. And I'm like, man, this is the whole point of this, what we are doing. And sometimes they maybe then even use it, but they don't really understand what is going on there and what's the real purposes of this. And this is kind of crazy to me. But the people have to put in the effort. And if you go on YouTube and you get a video of like, what is Bitcoin explained in 20 minutes, then some people are not willing to put this effort into learning what cryptocurrency and Bitcoin actually is. And let's say go on from there, because sometimes they might even understand, okay, yeah, this is Bitcoin, it's some kind of digital currency, but then when it comes to other networks, new chains, then you have side chains and state channels with constellation and smart contracts, and then they're out. And I understand that this is currently some kind of, let's say, nerd topic to the most people, and of course there are huge businesses, and it's beyond these, let's say, technical geeks we were back in the days, but it's still pretty hard to educate the normal people. And I think it's comparable to the shift from, for example, Facebook. So at some point only, let's say, younger people used Facebook, but now at this point like all the other persons also got into Facebook, and my mother is on Facebook, you know.
And to be fair, I think that's probably the way it should be, right? Because that's the whole point of technology. And let's take a very famous example in Web2. Uber wouldn't exist if it wasn't for mobile phones, geolocalization, and internet technology, right? Ask people how it actually works. Like, how does internet work? Like, very few people will be able to go into the nuts and bolts and all the details, and this is how it works, this is the protocols that are used and so on. Because quite simply, people don't need to, right? They have this application layer on top, and they only simply interact with it. And that's the only thing they need to know. They make it work for their benefit. And that's one of the examples that we saw with when internet started becoming very useful and was applied to existing industries like taxis in Uber's case. It was the same thing. You get into a car, you go from A to B, and you pay at the end. It was just a much more integrated, seamless experience. Very no running around waiting for a cab to show up. You just booked it, and that was it. And so I think we're at a similar stage for Web3, where more and more people who are willing to dive into it and willing to learn and willing to understand the underlying technology are then able to translate that into, okay, well, that actually is very interesting because it helps solve a huge issue that we see in the current market, and then go and apply that. But that is, with any technology, any period of evolution that we went through, that is probably a fairly small percentage of people that are willing to make that effort. And then it's our job, so to speak, to make that a very seamless and integrated experience for the rest of the population, because I think that's when we see the real adoption take place, when you don't really know if the app you're using on your phone, if it's a Web2 or a Web3 app, it just works, right? I think once we get to that stage, that's when the floodgates will open, because it doesn't really matter. And we see that with Alkimi as well, right? Ad exchanges exist, and they're very standardized, like the protocols that are used, the way data is transferred from A to B and so on is already very standardized. There are certain data types that the industry has agreed on. Also, and interestingly, almost as a reaction against the big two, which are Google and Facebook, the smaller, the smaller publishers and the smaller players in the market decided, well, we have to do something to stand in a way united against those two, because otherwise they will just kill everybody and take on the entire market. And so there are certain standards in which data is exchanged already. And that in itself is almost like a very early example of decentralized effort to make things work across different players. And that is something that we can now build on to say, well, these standards already exist. We're not changing that standard. We're still accepting the data in the same format for bid requests and bid responses and so on for the auctions for ads. But we're now applying a Web3 layer to it where, as you said, the data is a lot more transparent, right? We're giving access to a lot more of the details that Google and Facebook today just keep to themselves, because they use that to optimize their algorithms and become even more performing and basically just get a lot more budget in. We use that to give our clients that data back so they can optimize themselves. At the same time, when we speak to publishers and advertisers, in most cases, we don't even have to mention or explain in detail how that works kind of under the hood, because most industry players at the moment, everybody has heard of blockchain, everybody has heard of crypto, but depending on where the market sits, and right now, everything is in the red and everybody is scared and it's a bear market and all that, we don't even have to go a lot into this is blockchain, it's new, it's shiny, it's great. We just explain the problems that it helps solve, and that is what makes people think, okay, well, I really don't care how it works under the hood, but if these guys can resolve issue 1, 2, 3, if I pay less fees but I get better data, that's a no-brainer. Let's test it, right? And I think that is one of these examples where we see the applied technology, it kind of blurs the lines, and you don't have to wear I'm a Web3 guy badge. It's just, I have a solution for a problem that exists, because at the end of the day, that's all that businesses care about.
Yeah, I totally understand. And I think it's, like you mentioned, we are not changing any, let's say, existing standards, but we are taking them and, let's say, add additional information to this new metadata, and, like you said, better data actually. And this is also one aspect we are trying to solve with Obius, because we are also not creating a new standard, like everybody in the industry must shift to this standard, but we are taking the existing standards, for example, how documents are structured when you're creating an invoice, and just adding new data on top, and just, basically validating them on the hypergraph, and making this very transparent and eliminate the fraud that maybe currently is in the market. And like you said, it's a great...
Don't get me started on fraud, yeah.
Exactly. And I think this is a great entry point for everybody. And like you mentioned, there are companies out there that are using blockchain as some kind of buzzword. And I also experienced this, for example, when I tried to explain Obius to the local government here. And it was basically, when you use, let's say, blockchain, then it divides the masses in some way, because some people are like, okay, he's using this as some kind of buzzword, or some people don't understand this and it's too fancy for them, and it's basically, okay, I never even heard of blockchain, then I come with hypergraph and state channels and stuff like this, and their brain is totally no. And
heard of it, but only the bad, only the bad things.
Yeah, exactly. Only it's used for illegal things and whatever money. Yeah. So this is, like you said, it's great with the angle that you just say, okay, you don't have to know how this works really in depth, but you can be sure that we are solving this and that problem. And it actually works, and the people see this, and there are some people that validate this on a, let's say, more technical level. I think this is also why you do some kind of, for example, smart contract auditing or then later on maybe state channel auditing when this becomes a thing. And I think this is a great way to, let's say, onboard new people that maybe never even heard of. And I also think that this is great for Obius and Alkimi, because in the long run, we are also going to, let's say, onboard companies that never even heard of crypto and are not familiar with them, but they don't have to.
Exactly. I think that's where the space is so fascinating, because when you're as deep into the technology as you and we are, you understand, you kind of see all the dots kind of connect in the background. Then you can basically go to that and use that in your discussions with potential clients to the degree necessary, right? We have some clients that are very interested in it. They want to kind of push the envelope. They want to be associated with Web3 and innovation and make things better and so on. That's great, because that's a great discussion to have. At the same time, we have other clients who literally just, the pitch is essentially take your cable, unplug from Google edX and plug it in here. It works the same way. You don't have to change anything you're doing. All of a sudden you pay a lot lower fees and you get better data, right? Like, what's not to like? And I think that's one of those things where you can really easily adapt your point of view, essentially, not your point of view, but your position, how you position the technology. And that's something that we all have to get used to. I think we see a lot of discussion on Twitter and in Telegram and Discord and so on, where you have these hardcore believers like Web3 is the future and it's going to, wash away everything and just be the new reality. And no, it isn't. It's definitely coming, and it's very early days. I was reading a study the other day from a Boston consulting group who did a great study on like what does the future hold for crypto exchanges. And it's a long document, so no need to read everything, but there's one graph in there that I really liked, and it compared the evolution of internet technology to the evolution of blockchain technology. And they kind of overlaid the two graphs in terms of where we are. And in terms of internet years, blockchain is roughly in 1998 at the moment, right? So, and that is like where companies like PayPal and Google were founded. So you realize, it's pretty early days. If you now see like where Google and PayPal and these companies are today, you understand like the potential that sits within that sector. Like, if we play our cards right, we can be the really early adopters of the technology and, obviously benefit from that in the years to come.
Yeah, totally. And when you were speaking of exchanges, I also think that the current market is like not really focusing on, let's say, enterprises right now, because we see so many projects, thousands of coins, but they're basically, the most are, let's say, meme coins, the most are NFT collections of a drawing of whatever, 10,000 NFTs per collection, and then you sell them, and then basically 1 year later they are worthless. And so currently we haven't, of course, reached the full potential of Web3, and also with like the exchanges. There are so many exchanges out there. When you, for example, go to CoinMarketCap and scroll down the list, there are so many, but I would say that only the top 5 are really liquid when it comes to, let's say, providing liquidity. And I wouldn't go with any other exchange, to be honest, on a daily base. Sometimes there are some gems that are only available at certain exchanges, of course. But when it comes to, let's say, real trading of currency, I can only, let's say, use the top 5, I would say, because beside from this, everything is so illiquid. And it's basically everyone is trying to push their brand, and it's like, we are such a great exchange, but basically most of the current companies that you see is basically just show and hype, and nothing really behind this. And I hope that we see a shift from there, because we all know these great projects with utility that we see on a daily basis, maybe on Twitter timeline and stuff. But this sometimes gets, let's say, buried under the noise of meme coins and NFT collections, and So I hope this will be a great shift in the future, of course.
Yeah, I think we saw this with when Ethereum came around and had these two great innovations, one, smart contracts, and secondly, the ERC20 standard, where all of a sudden anybody and their cousin could create a cryptocurrency like within 5 minutes and launch. I think that's still we've all seen this when you go back to the charts. You see these hype cycles where all of a sudden, everybody gets into hype mode, and you see this bull market take flight, and every coin is a great coin because there's a white paper and everybody believes in it, and it just explodes and then it goes right back to zero. And I think that's still a reputation that the market suffers from to a certain degree, because those are the stories that then are told in the in the media, because it's so much more fun, so to say, to tell a story about somebody, oh, they got in, and then see, we told you it's dangerous. And I think that's where the traditional markets, if you want to call it that, have to play an important role. And that's why I like exchanges and companies like Uphold, for example, where they are regulated, they play the game properly, they try to integrate traditional safety mechanisms and so on, and you can go and basically buy with your debit card, right? That is ease of use to me. That is something that's easily for people to that's easy for people to adopt, and just go and actually take that and say, well, I'm interested. Here's an easy way. I don't have to create an account as a browser extension somewhere, and then I have to find a way somehow to get some of my euros or dollars or pounds into a cryptocurrency, but I actually want to buy the other one, but so I have to trade my euros into whatever USDT, and then I have to trade the USDT into the actual project. Like, you will lose people after 20 seconds, because that's way too much effort, and way too scary. Because when you start transferring money between your wallets, there is, depending on the amount, it's a bit of, well, there's no safety net. Like, either I get the address right or it's gone. So it's not like you can call customer service at MetaMask and go like, oh, well, sorry, I have a question about this transaction. Like, your responsibility, go for it. So I think that's where these more, call them hybrid companies, these companies that try to, yes, use the innovative technology, but they try to play it right, and they try to fit in more or less with the traditional markets, to say this is not a big scary thing, it's just a new technology. There are certain safety mechanisms in place. And I mean, regulation is a bit of a hot topic, and everything happening with the SEC in the US is probably worth a full episode by itself. Yeah. But in general, personally, I'm not one to call like, oh, regulation is bad and it's going to kill the market and they just want to control everything. It's needed for proper adoption of the technology, because businesses in particular, and even just regular people, will not use something when there's not a certain degree of safety and validation associated with it, I think.
Yeah, and I think these are some other parties that come into play. For example, we currently spoke about like companies like Obius and Alkimi, and then we have, let's say, the normal retail people that are, let's say, trying to get into this, or maybe they will be trying. And then you mentioned also the, let's say, media and different news outlets in some way. And like you mentioned, the story of someone who maybe loses 5 million in Dogecoin, or maybe makes 5 million in Dogecoin, is always more funny than a cryptocurrency project that is designed for payments, and this did a, let's say, 2x or 3x, and then that's it. But like, this is the real adoption that is happening, but nobody really cares about this, because it's only 100% gains, or it's only 3x or whatever. And then the other party is like the regulatory side. Also the SEC in America is, I think, very famous for this. And of course, with the ongoing case with XRP, and if this is a security and stuff. But like you mentioned, the regulatory clarity is really needed. And there are some players that are only waiting for this regulatory clarity, because if you cannot be sure if the coin you want to buy is basically illegal in some way in the US, for example, then there's no good way for you to handle the situation beside just waiting for clarity. And this is a great thing. What do you think are the most important regulatory things that should be happen in order to, let's say, create the playing field for mass adoption?
I think it's, they're called cryptocurrencies, and I think that's a big decision to be made based on, or per project almost, or per currency. Like, how does it classify, right? Because governments are not going to go away. Businesses are not going to change things just because a new technology comes around. And one example I often think of is, Brave browser. Like, I like it a lot, I use it and so on, but it's niche within a niche within a niche, right? Because you're using something that is innovative and that works, and you pay people in cryptocurrency, if they watch some ads and so on. That's great. The idea is great, but you're literally telling people you have to change the way you do things. You have to install Brave. You have to use Brave rather than using Safari or Chrome or whatever you used to. And that is a big hurdle for most. And so I think for regulation itself, it's a clear definition of which projects or currencies fall into which category, because there are different, like with any business, there are different scenarios, right? There are definitely projects where the cryptocurrency is a security, or is it a commodity, or is it a utility token, and that is really based on what the project is about and what the technology is trying to achieve. And so I think a clear framework around these are the guidelines. Go and check yourself against that list. And it's almost like a decision tree, right? If you do this, you're more likely in this category or that category. And just having that, it sounds so easy, but just getting to that level of clarity seems to be incredibly difficult. Not going to go into the kind of political discussion around this, in terms of, why that is, and, is it the traditional markets against the new markets and so on. But I think that would be the biggest. It's probably the lowest hanging fruit, but the biggest hurdle at the moment, it seems, to have a clear definition as to what is a token, what different types of tokens are there, and here's a list, or here's a checklist on how you can kind of evaluate yourself against that list to determine in which category you should consider yourself in. And then there's a certain list of rules and guidelines for each of these categories. So as a business, that you're operating in a safe space, because you can always point back to these guidelines and say, well, the guidelines say we should be doing A, B, C. Here's proof that we're actually doing that. So we're within that regulation. And that is especially for companies like Obius, like Alkimi, like we're trying to work with, it's a B2B solution. So we're trying to work with existing businesses. A lot of these businesses will only work with us if there is proof and validation and confirmation that, yes, this is a validated business. It's completely legal and compliant to work with these companies. And so that for me is the foundation of everything.
Yeah, and I think also when it comes to the regulation side, it's very important to have this clarity. Yeah, because otherwise, or maybe you don't even do business in, for example, America, but it's always better to have this kind of regulatory clarity, even if the, for example, local government here in Germany, for example, isn't so far and hasn't really got into what cryptocurrency really is. But yeah, I think this is a huge advantage. And currently, there's no real, let's say, way to, for example, avoid, for example, getting sued for something you do with cryptocurrency. The only thing you can do is like picking smaller details out of, let's say, existing lawsuits and see some judgments on this, and then just try to be better than the competition to not get into focus of the SEC or whatever. But I think this is not how it should work.
Well, but that's exhausting, right? Because you're spending more time trying to understand what's the latest move of this or that regulatory body in whichever country you're in. That's exhausting. It doesn't provide like a safe space for innovation to flourish, right? And so that's something we should get to, where innovation, when you innovate, when you do things, you move fast and you break stuff, as they always say. Yes, you need some kind of framework. By all means, just let's throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. A lot of things that we try will not work, and we'll just learn and move on. That's okay, but we have to make sure that whatever room and whatever scenario we operate in, there is a certain framework and guidelines around that to make sure that it's a safe space to go and try. It's like having a safe lab where you can go and you can experiment, and that whatever happens, okay, it's fine. Not everything might work out, but at least you're allowed to try things, because that's where the magic happens, where you push the envelope and you try to find new ways of doing things, improve existing things, and help with the issues that the market is facing today. That's only possible if you don't have to spend 80% of your time trying to keep up with some random decisions based by some random code based on something they don't understand.
Exactly. And if there would be some kind of, let's say, hard definition, for example, when the company holds more than 10% of the token, then it's some kind of centralized and it's basically some kind of equity of the company or so, then it would at least be clear. Maybe it's not my opinion, or it shouldn't be this way, but at least we would have some kind of clarity. But for example, when we get some statements from the SEC, like when only one holder holds your token as some kind of or with profit in mind, then it's automatically some kind of equity. Yeah, then you can basically just interpret everything into this and say, yeah, okay, at every project there is somebody that is only holding this for profit. Who knows? You might even don't know this guy, but yeah, maybe it is. And so in the end, you cannot really control this, and it's basically a statement that can be applied for every situation, and you can just make everything with this out of this. And I think this is not fair for all the different companies that are willing to go under this process and are willing to, let's say, register their product and register their utility token. And at the same time, these, let's say, regulatory persons just try to avoid the discussion, because I think then also it would come out that back in the days they did some things that are not very logical. And so it might get embarrassing for these, let's say, old traditional departments. But who knows?
That would never happen. They're all above board. Don't worry.
Who knows when this will take place? But of course, I think with a growing industry in the cryptocurrency market and other companies that are adopting on this, the pressure gets higher on creating this. Because back in the days when there are like two companies that want this regulatory clarity, it's okay. You can avoid and ignore this basically, and maybe drag, for example, the case with the SEC and Ripple endless. But when there are new players, maybe we see some kind of, for example, Google with, I think they partnered with Coinbase recently. So I think there are more and more clarity involved in this, and hopefully we will get this soon, and hopefully it will be very freedom orientated. You know.
And I think that's where, going back to our initial topic, I think that's where education is so important. And so it's a unique opportunity for us to basically be part of something before it gets to mass adoption. And I think that's why it's even more important that we help educate people on this, because it is a once in a lifetime opportunity for most of us to be part of this and hopefully improve our futures, so to speak, because it's just something that once the regulatory issues are squared away and legal guidelines and so on are in place, the adoption that we'll see of the technology is just going to be massive, I think.
Yeah. And also speaking from the accredited investor side, I recently read an article about that they want to, let's say, extend this barrier to 10 million minimum, I think. So it's like dividing.
That's inflation for you, isn't it?
Sorry?
That's inflation for you.
So it's basically, I don't know. I don't like the step, to be honest, because it's also dividing the masses a bit more into like the persons, like you mentioned, that are already made money, made huge money out of this, and have the exclusive opportunity to invest in new startups and whatever way before the masses are. And I think this is the wrong way, and I hope we can shift this as, let's say, the Web3 community and come to a more fair and more decentralized solution where nobody can just dictate, it's 10 million, maybe tomorrow it's 50 million, who knows. Then just, let's say, going away from the centralized thoughts and going to a more decentralized way. Of course, not only our let's say, not everything can be, let's say, made decentralized completely. Sometimes you need this kind of trust in some parties sometimes, but of course there is so much space for improvement, and I think this will be done over the following years.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something early on, which is probably the biggest takeaway and maybe a way to close this out for today. You spoke of identity and the data that we hold and so on. And I think that is the biggest difference we see. there's lots of buzzwords with like centralized, decentralized, all that. I think this movement to go back to it's your data, you should own it, you should decide what you want to do with it, or if you give access, if you give somebody access to the data, it's valuable. So you should be in some way, shape, or form be rewarded for that. I think that is the biggest shift we're seeing, and just using Alkimi as an example again because it's kind of close to home. That is our initial promise, right? It's the equation used to be you have three parties that are involved in advertising. You have the publishers, the advertisers, and then you have the actual users. You have the publishers that want to show an ad to a user. Ideally, it's by a brand that actually has a product that is interesting for that user. So everybody wins, right? The publisher makes some money, the advertiser gets access to a potential client, and the potential client sees a product that they're potentially interested in. And that at some point in time, that just shifted to it's the publishers and advertisers, and they're making money, the ad exchanges are making money off the user's data, because today there's no compensation whatsoever. We're being bombarded with advertisement. Go to Forbes.com, try to read any article. It's a nightmare. You have to click like 17 times, different banners and so on, most of which are completely irrelevant and unrelated to you. It's just that the publishers, the website have been put in a corner. Somebody was like, well, you have to finance yourself with advertising. So they almost have no choice but to show more and more ads, just hoping that somebody will accidentally click and generate some revenue that way. But that is a vicious circle because it's just going to make the experience so much worse for users over time. It already is. And so you have more and more people installing ad blockers, which puts more pressure on publishers to actually show even more ads. They're lower quality, it's a bit random. It's like these spam sites that just basically are just banner after banner after banner of some random thing, just hoping you would click. And that's a cycle that we aim to break by saying, well, it's your data, you can be part of the ecosystem. If you hold ads tokens, you can actually be rewarded because you're fueling the engine that allows the publishers and the advertisers to actually interact with each other, and you'll be rewarded for that in some way. And I'm sure that at Obius you're thinking of various ways to have a similar approach where you say, as a user, you should be rewarded in some way for the data that you're giving. The way you use the platform and so on is not just, well, it's another piece of software. It's something that gives you back a bit more control.
Exactly. And I think the last point to mention is what I always find so great about cryptocurrency and like Web3 in general, that you as a company are so close actually to the community. So back in the days, remember some, let's say, Web2 startups, you wouldn't come as close as you currently are with like Telegram groups and following them on Twitter and interacting with them and having Q&As about the technology. And this is nothing that happens like in the, let's say, Web2 industry often, that you have, let's say, people from the board and they're speaking with the community and exactly. And for example, also with the Alkimi landing party you're currently doing, it's also great to, let's say, unite the community and meet up at some places, and not only at let's say certain events from like external parties, but also hosting these events yourself. And I think this is nothing you can find anywhere in the Web2 space. And for example, Cyberlead doing game nights with the community, and this is just incredible. Thinking about this could never happen in Web2, so I really love it.
It could be a nice tagline where we say, in Web3, users make the product; they aren't the product. So
exactly.
It's an interesting approach. Maybe to close this out for today, because we're 47 minutes in. What do you think over, let's say, the next 2 to 5 years? Like, where do you see the Web3 space going? Like, what's your top 2, top 3 predictions of what's going to happen with Web3 and what we'll see change over that time?
So when we speak about 5 years, then I would 100% say that we get some kind of clarity and some kind of framework, like you mentioned. Maybe it's not fully developed by then, but hopefully we will have some kind of clarity what specifically is some kind of equity and security of a company and which is not. So this would be top one, the best case, of course. And also some kind of, let's say, shift from these this cult of meme coins and spamming with bots on Twitter and Telegram, and having this industry so spammy and full of low quality services and stuff like this. Like currently, when we started doing AMAs with Obius, I think every day I get like over 15 DMs from more bots and people that try to convince me to, let's say, go to them for an AMA for like 1K or whatever. And it's so, let's say, so spammy and low quality. And I hope we will see a shift from there to, let's say, more projects that are doing quality work over there, like Alkimi and Obius and other great projects from the hypergraph space and beyond, of course. And I think there is so much opportunity to improve the current Web2 markets. And I think we will see this win.
I agree that the bots are very annoying. Like, I like those that start with, "Hey, I'm not a scammer or anything. I thought you'd be interested in that link."
I think I got like 2 or 3 of them currently on my phone, but I'm deleting everything. Don't even try.
I think on my end, I would say, the biggest shift I hope to see is, we've seen various cycles now over the last, even just the last couple of years with DeFi and NFTs and so on. And I hope that we're really getting close to a utility-driven market. And that's something that I very strongly believe in, that you have to show that it's more than just a sexy presentation and, you have a cryptocurrency, so you're cool. You have to show it in action. You have to show that it actually works, because especially in the space that we operate in, much like you have to bridge this. You have one foot in each world, right? Web2, Web3, like it's a very much an established business or industry that we're working with. And then we have this innovative technology on the other side that we're trying to bring into that market. So I think we really have to get to a point where we can show that this new technology actually works. It's applied and it works and it helps improve things. Once that starts, I think that's going to be the big decision maker for anybody wanting to invest, is like, show me how it works, show me that it actually helps improve processes, because that's the only way long term to drive value for a token. And so I'm very, very excited personally, because we're very close to launching the Alkimi ad exchange, at least its first iteration, where we're currently onboarding publishers, we're onboarding advertisers. And so just showing it in action, I think, is going to be a bit of a big aha moment, maybe for quite a few, even in the community, because so far it's always been like, the hope that someday, yes, it'll work. But then even beyond that, people will understand that there's some that can be done with it. It's not just maybe one day, it's actually here, it's live, it's happening. So yeah, I hope that, we can provide our own little building block in this big Web3 market that we're all building, to make sure that, current businesses understand the interest in getting involved, not necessarily becoming an expert themselves. Again, I think the real use cases will come once you can use Web3 technology as easily as you can do Web2 today. Like, you don't have to, if you want to pull back the curtain and understand a little bit how it works in the background, even better, because chances are that as a business, you can actually benefit from that as well and use it to your advantage. But if you don't want to, if it's all, fiat based and just you're used to paying your whatever annual or monthly fee in this or that way, just because you're using some kind of software, I think that's the level that we should get to with any new Web3 technology as well. It should be just seamless, and people can pay for a service much like they pay for a service today. What you do with that then in the background and how that ties into this parallel economy of the cryptocurrency, that's another thing to then figure out, or for the project to ensure that it works smoothly. But I think hopefully utility is going to be the big term for the next few years to come.
Exactly. I'm 100% sure this will happen.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Great. Well, Phil, it's been a pleasure having you on. Any final comments, remarks, or questions you want to cover?
I think we can agree that Web3 is the future in some way, and the shift doesn't happen overnight. And I think we are in a very great position with both our companies, and we have a great, let's say, head start. And we are ahead of the time in some way. So in the future we will be seeing this benefit, and I think people should look into cryptocurrency more. My final statement.
I agree. I agree. And we're here to help them understand how it works. So great. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much for joining. Again, look forward to doing this again in the near future.
Sure.
Been a pleasure. And have a fantastic week, and we'll speak soon.
Perfect, man. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.